All right. I think possibly what I did was end on time somehow. Is this true?
5 more minutes.
Woo! Okay, well, I just want to say real quick, this is it's a toner. Does anyone know what language I was just singing in or attempt to sing in? Does anyone want to guess? Nope. It's okay. It's okay. Huh? Wolof. Yoruba, yes. Okay, what were we saying? Oh, that's not fair. Hold up. Not fair. There's a professor in the stand. That's not fair. But it was Yoruba. Could you explain what we were bringing up?
You know what, honey? I can't. I just got here.
Okay.
But I know you were singing in Yoruba.
That was Yoruba. So what it was we were raising up is when we say ire, it's like there's no easy equivalent in English to talk about what ire is, but whatever brings you the most joy and what raises up that good feeling of living and being alive in you that would be ire, right? That's ire. Like what I want best for me, I want for you is ire. We say ire alafia. It's like I want that and peace for you. When you say ashe, it's like saying, put it on the one. Or no, drop it like it's hot. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I can't say that to that language. Pardon me. It's the American in me. What I'm basically, ashe, there is really no equivalent again in English, but it is in everything alive. Ashe is present in everything alive. The ground, the wind, the water, it's in what we can't see. Ashe is in everything. Ashe is in you. Yeah, so we were just affirming that. If I say it, ashe, ashe. All right? Cool. Give yourselves a hand. Woo.
You ready for me?
Yes, let's get it.
So after that beautiful welcome, I will share an official welcome. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Kristen Brogdon. I'm Northrop's Director of Artistic and Community Programs. For access purposes, I am a blonde white woman. I'm wearing glasses with blue frames and a beige turtleneck today. The University of Minnesota Spotlight Series is a collaborative partnership between the Institute for Advanced Study and Northrop to present lectures, conversations, performances, exhibits, and other events around timely topics of interest throughout the academic year. This year's series focuses on racial and social justice. Today's event, Drumfolk and the Stono Rebellion, is the second Spotlight Series event of the year, and I want to take a moment of gratitude to our panelists and moderator as they approach a topic that represents a difficult moment in our shared history. It's a topic in which we can recognize some of the themes that we see in America today, from violence against Black bodies to the use of music as an element of protest. But because the historic moment has not been studied and taught to the same degree as other events in colonial history, we're in a little bit of uncharted territory. So I hope that you will join me in a spirit of curiosity and a spirit of grace as we approach the topics surrounding Drumfolk and the Stono Rebellion artistically and academically. And I thank you for joining us for this important conversation. Today's event includes professional captioning. You can view captions by clicking the stream text link that will be shared in the chat or by clicking the show captions button in the Zoom menu. We're also using Slido to facilitate our Q&A today. So attendees can use their smartphones and scan the QR code that is displayed on the screen, or you can go to www.slido.com and enter the code Spotlight Series, all together as one word. Please note that questions can be submitted anonymously. We encourage you to upvote previously submitted questions to ensure that we address questions based on audience interest priority. And please know that in order to respond to as many questions as possible, we may occasionally combine related questions. We will also have a microphone available in the auditorium today for those of you who are here in person without your smartphones. My next step in welcoming you today is to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the ancestral and contemporary lands of Dakota people, and that the University of Minnesota was not only built on unceded Dakota land, but built with the proceeds from selling thousands of acres of Dakota and Anishinaabe land. In Northrop, we see this land acknowledgement as part of our mission and as one way that we can educate our campus and community about this land and our relations with it and with each other. We also co-present events and exhibits centering Native and Indigenous voices, including the exhibition that you can visit in the gallery adjacent to this theater, and we know that we continually have work to do. Especially because of the content of today's conversation, I also acknowledge the unpaid labor of enslaved Africans whose dreams of freedom we'll discuss today, and who, along with their descendants, built much of the economic infrastructure of our country. Knowing that injustice continues, I stand in solidarity with the families whose loved ones have been killed by police violence in Minnesota, including George Floyd, Dante Wright, Jamar Clark, and Philando Castile. Now, without further delay, I have the pleasure of introducing today's moderator, who has already introduced himself to us in music, but we'll get into words in a moment. And then he will invite our panelists to introduce themselves. Truth Mays, aka William Harris, was born with a strong rhythmic sense, making him a natural drummer. Known as the Unstoppable B-Fresh, William became a part of the groundbreaking IRM crew, one of the first hip-hop groups out of the Twin Cities to attain national accolades, thus cementing his place as an icon in the Minnesota music scene. With more than 2,000 shows under his belt, this drummer, poet, beatboxer, hip-hop scholar, and youth mentor has recorded and performed internationally and has been compared to Gil Scott-Heron, Saul Williams, and KRS-One. Blending his vocal arts with instruction and theater, Truth Mays balances his love for music with his love for his community, working with numerous youth and community organizations. His art is his passion, activism, and spirit. Truth, the floor is yours again.
Woo! Was that about, you sure that's true? No, I'm just kidding. How's everybody doing? Thank you again for being here this evening. This is a very, I'm very honored to be able to be in this position to talk with some esteemed scholars here to share a lot of their wisdom with you tonight. So first, just give them a hand. Would you do that? Just welcome them, just give them a hand. I'm gonna start to my right, and then I will let them succinctly proceed to just introduce themselves. And so I'll start right here.
Thank you. We're working okay? All right. My name is C. Brian Williams. I'm the founder and executive producer of Step Africa. Step Africa is the first professional company in the world dedicated to the art form of stepping. And stepping, for those who don't know, is a highly energetic, percussive, polyrhythmic dance form created by African-American college students who are members of fraternities and sororities. This year we celebrate 30 years of performing all over the world. Yeah, we can give a hand for that. And I'm so glad that you'll be here. Hopefully you'll be here to not just see this panel, but to see our newest work, Drumfolk.
Hello, my name is Aaron Hall. I'm an assistant professor of history here at the U. My research expertise is in the history of slavery as a public institution, as a legal institution. Primarily, I research in the late colonial and early republic period, but I also, it's important to reflect on longer chronologies and genealogies of law and enslavement, which the Stono Rebellion absolutely is.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Keith Mays. I am an associate professor in African American and African Studies department here. I've been teaching courses in African American history and the civil rights movement. My specialty is late 20th century African American history, Black studies. Just recently finished a book on educational civil rights, the history of special education, Black students, and racial disproportionality. For access purposes, I am wearing short locks, have glasses on, have a light blue collar shirt with blue, maybe turquoise pants, and blue Kohans. And so thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for being here. And in following protocol, to describe myself, Troop Mays, I'm wearing a yellow fila, a Nigerian-style hat. I have on a blue paisley-ish kind of shirt. I have some accidentally bleach-washed Levi's, and and I have on a pair of blue tennis shoes. And so, all right. Well, you all ready to jump right into it? Okay. Question number one is, what was the Stono Rebellion? And can you situate the event in time and place for us? Who would like to jump in on that?
Sure. So the Stono Rebellion is a major slave uprising in one of the 13 original British colonies in North America, that being South Carolina. It happened in 1739. The event itself has a variety of sources through which it has been understood to have taken place. It remains a subject of research despite the relatively scanty record, because it is significant, because it casts a long shadow. In short, a road crew of enslaved Africans, not born in the United States, but born in Africa, in an area called Angola that was probably the Congo, were working on a public road, and they ceased to do so. They went to a store. In the store, took guns, ammunition, supplies, and engaged in an act of insurrection against colonial authorities. They began marching south towards the Florida border. Stono is about 150 miles north of the Florida border. Florida at this time is a Spanish possession. The Spanish are at war with Great Britain at that time. There's more that can be said about Spanish relations and how the rebels might have seen this moment, but in particular, the rebels were probably or almost certainly Catholic Congolese who on this particular Sunday might have been in particular drawn to the appeal of safety, security, freedom beyond the British imperial border in Spanish territory, the Spanish being fellow Catholics. The uprising is violent. It involves multiple clashes. Through this march southward, plantations are burned, slaveholders are killed, as are some family members of the slaveholders, or the extended slaveholding families are killed. At some point, the party stops for rest. The party has swollen. It is larger than it initially was, now, in addition to these Congolese, other Africans or potentially African Americans, that being black people born in the colonies, have joined the ranks. This culminates in an open battle with militia forces, white militia forces, and then after something that might be called a defeat and the scattering of this group, smaller groups continue to engage in a sort of set of tactical guerrilla warfare. Ultimately, the last Stono rebel is captured and killed more than a year later. So that, in short, is the Stono Rebellion in place in time.
I love the I'll call it the tidbit at the end. The final Seminole warrior was caught and trapped. I like that piece. Yes, this has been like an adventure. I want to just say that this has been such an adventure for myself as an artist, and just so much is still coming up. So I hope that you all take your own adventure into this history as you will. So we're going on to question number 2. Who were the Stono rebels? What was their environment like? What would the atmosphere had been like for the Stono rebels? What did their world look like? Anybody wanna jump in on that?
I mean, I really, to be honest, as an artist, I'm loving having these fantastic historians here. And I'll briefly start, but I would love for the professor to even go deeper in terms of, he touched on a lot about being from what is now known today as Angola, more than likely the Congo. Step Africa had a chance to actually go to Angola and do some research there in terms of traditions. And when you speak of, for me, what this moment reminds me of is who Africans were before they arrived. You mentioned they were already Catholics, and so they came here with so much traditions. And what we also found there is that Angola, the people that came, that were enslaved, were also trained in their own degree of warfare. So war was not unfamiliar to them. It wasn't like something they just discovered, and they knew freedom. And I think that definitely informs what happened at the Stono Rebellion. But I'd love for you to maybe dive some more into that, who they were. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, those points are really, really important to contextualize, because many of the Africans who were captured on the coast of Africa and in the interior were captured because of internal tribal wars and kingdom wars that made it possible for many Africans to end up on slave ships and of course brought over during the Middle Passage. And indeed, that is an eclectic mix of Africans, even from the Congolese region that they were taken from. South Carolina Africans are a mix of folks who call home probably all the way up as far north as Senegambia, going around to the Bight of Biafra and Benin, on down to the Congo. And they ended up in the colony of South Carolina as newcomers to the colony. And I'm glad you mentioned that there were Africans there already who were considered Creole. They were mixed in many different ways, not only mixed in terms of racial ancestry, but mixed in terms of the ways in which they may have been acculturated into this new place in terms of language and customs. There's a wonderful series of articles and even books on how Africa becomes Black America. So, Black America in the making. So you may have folks who maybe even came from the Caribbean as well, from Barbados, that are part of the South Carolina Black community. And they all have to mesh and try to figure out their surroundings and certainly try to process this dehumanization that's taking place on these rice plantations and the low country South Carolina. And one of the more fascinating things is that they have to try to figure out, as a diverse set of people, how do they operate as one, as they decide to move from plantation to plantation, not only in the Stono Rebellion, but even other parts of their lives. They have to try to figure this out. That what I love about this early story is that what seemingly is a moment of diversity and fragmentation. We often hear about the fragmentation and the tensions between Africans and African Americans. Well, that was probably part of that context as well. But they had to work it out because they were evolving into one people. But by the time we get to we're still in the 1730s, 1740s, it still has not quite been worked out yet. So it's not an accident that the Africans, the Angolans, would be at the forefront of this movement to rebel, because many of the black folks who were there a little longer were, they were courageous, but many of them were not. And we can talk about that more in terms of the tensions of black folks who sold them out, sold many of the folks out.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to go ahead, Aaron, and touch on that with us?
I was just going to add a few more details,
Yes,
but stop me if I go on too long.
I don't want to stop you. Come on, let's get it.
I was just going to say that South Carolina, in particular, amongst like northern British, British colonies in North America, was a very distinctive colonial space. It attained a black majority, a black enslaved majority, early in 1708 or 1707, and by 1739 or 1740, of the 45,000 enumerated residents who were non-indigenous, only 15,000 were white. So that is a demographic profile that looks much more like the Sugar Isles in the Caribbean. It doesn't look like Virginia, and this has significant consequences for the type of intercultural communication and the presence of multiple African traditions or ancestries. The Congolese, in particular, in the Stono Rebellion, are trained soldiers. They've almost certainly used guns and are familiar with warfare in a modern or European sense. At that juncture, picking up rifles from a store wasn't an exploratory act; it was a familiar act.
So rich.
I love that. I love that. I love the way you put that in. And I can't help but think about the birthplace of capoeira when I think about the Congo. So anyway, a whole nother tactical system itself. All right, so I want to go into question number 3. How y'all doing out there? Is everybody good? All right, I love it. I'm glad you're with us. The question here is, why were there drums at the Stono Uprising? What can you tell us about drumming in the African diaspora during the age of Atlantic slavery?
I'll start briefly from the artistic perspective. And I will say that this is so rich that you guys are having this, because when you enter the space and see the performance, what I love is that we start the story, the performance in 1739 in a praise house, if you will, which is a safe space where Africans could gather during the times of slavery. And this is where the ideas we are playing with could have begun. They could have discussed this rebellion potentially, or maybe. And this is clearly an artistic response. It's not a literal reenactment of the Stono Rebellion. But it reminds us of something that hasn't been studied a lot, at least in my educational experience, of who African people were prior to their arrival and what they brought here. It's been touched on here and there, but this show, when you walk in, these Africans who are enslaved are working towards freedom and trying to get to this new space. And so when you asked about drums, when we were in Angola, and I remember I was doing a presentation to the Angolan audience after a Step Africa performance, and I was mentioning our research on Drumfolk, and I asked the Angolan audience, I said, can you imagine Angolan traditions and culture without a drum? And it was like a notable gasp from the audience, like, that's not possible. Drums without, that's not even,
Right.
can't even imagine that. So when you come to, clearly Africans would bring these traditions of drumming, experiences with drums here, whether they were visibly present or not. And what's interesting to me is, would they start to make drums out of local materials, the drums that they used in the Stono Rebellion, which they said helped to call people and motivate the fighters, the activists, were present. But so that's just something I'm thinking about in terms of when you ask a question about was drumming present and why would it be there?
Well, I would like for you to extend a little bit more on like the process of, you know, like the historical memory of Stono and like how you were in developing the project and the approach. Could you just touch on that some?
Well, it has been a really interesting journey. This Stono Rebellion is so important to Step Africa in particular is because for years we've been looking for, if you will, the origins of stepping. So stepping, we know, is a percussive dance form where the body is the drum, and we know it's rooted in early African-American, when African-Americans first began to go to colleges in the early 1900s. So that's where we start to create fraternities and sororities, and soon after, we create a very African way to express our love and pride in these groups. And we could talk about the gestation of stepping from 1906 until present day. But what was missing in the conversation about stepping is, well, why do we step in the first place? Why is the drum the body the instrument? Why don't we just play drums and dance, as it's still prevalent in the Caribbean? In Cuba, the drum is still prevalent. In Jamaica, the drum is prevalent. It was taken away in some parts of the colonies. Why is African-American communities and folkloric traditions so drum absent, but yet so drum present? When I mean beatboxing or tap dance and ring shout and those forms where the drum is clearly present, but it's not in that form. So that's what really sparked us to dive into this history. And it really is, as evidenced in this conversation, there's so much more to go.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna keep it moving, y'all. This is so beautiful. Keith, how have music, dance, and memory been used in Black protest and political expression in the United States? What can such invocations and representations of the past accomplish?
Is it on? Yep, there we go. Oh man, that's a really powerful question. Well, one, I want to start by saying this, that if you were not familiar with the drum or even musical, the function of musical instruments and the use of them in a protest tradition or even a non-protest tradition, to hear Brother Truth perform, one is inevitably going to have a certain kind of reaction. So let's say you're just complacent when you first hear Brother Truth perform. You can't stay in that mode. The drum will not allow you to remain there because the communicative power of the drum is trying to call you to action. The action could be something that is a little bit more leisurely. It could make you happy. It could put you in a really in a safe space of feeling or sort of engaging in a certain kind of well-being that makes you feel good. But it also, especially in the case of rebellion and protest, can call you to action, and you can't not help but to be moved by the power of the drum when it's actually telling you to do something. In the case of the Stono Rebels, that drum was summoning them, and it was a call to action for them to act. That was true in 1739. That's certainly true even in 2023. So when you actually said that, imagine, even today on a Black protest, imagine that there was no sound. Imagine any of the protests, any of the rallies you've gone to in the last 1, 2, 3 years, and there was no sound associated. with the rally? Would it be a rally? Would it be the same thing? Would it represent the same event? And the answer to that is no. But yes, in the civil rights movement, they had silent protests, for sure. But the mere fact that rebellion and protest has always accompanied the Black freedom struggle is because it is galvanizing a group of people to act. And in the case of the Stono Rebellions, it was the act of rebelling and freeing oneself by killing white folk, etc. In a modern day protest, the objective may be a little bit different, although I think the audience, the white audiences, would perceive the actions of a modern day protest to be somewhat similar. Like, these Negroes are really about to strike a blow for freedom here, and which means that my physical well-being could be at stake. But certainly, the Black freedom struggle is always accompanied and is always represented by the soundtrack of music and performance. It's not an aside. It's not marginal to the enterprise. It's core to it. And so I don't, if you look at some of the modern day struggles of the 1960s with the protest traditions coming out of whether the civil rights phase of the movement with Martin Luther King and SNCC, or the Black Power phase with the Black Panthers and what have you, music and this call to action is always going to accompany that. And certainly we hear that also in modern day forms of music like jazz and hip hop culture.
Yeah, gosh, yes, conjuring so much. I was on my way somewhere and I was listening to KRSM, which is a local community radio station, and there was a version of "The World Is White, the world is," that you know, like and that song comes from out of a certain particular awareness in time, like in the 70s when people were like, yo, tune out from all the, you know, more love, less war kind of thing. So, and then I think about Public Enemy's music when it's like there literally was a war against crack taking over. The music was speaking to that. So I like the way that we can see that there's been.
And just you'd say Public Enemy, one of the things that's so profound about their music is the drum. It's the drum and the bass. One of the things that's so profound about Max Roach is the drumming. I mean, he was a jazz drummer, but certainly he used that instrument in a certain way, again, to communicate to his people about what he wanted to see done.
Beautiful. Let's keep it moving, y'all. Aaron, I want to have you talk to in our present day government. Can you talk about there possibly being similarities between the 1740 Act, the 1740 Negro Act, and our present day government? Do you see any similarities? That's a loaded one. I just had to hit you with it, bro. Just
It's a very loaded question. I will answer it in initially a roundabout way, and then maybe in a direct way.
Give us what you got.
So, slavery, Anglo-American slavery, I should say, is an inherently spatialized regime. That is to say that it's predicated upon enclosing people in a space. Then labor extraction, exploitation can occur, but space is crucial, and the drum, I should add, is a spatial weapon or an it confronts space with sound that can project, which is like anti-containment. And so one of the features of the features of the 1740 act for better ordering of the Negroes, quote unquote, is to ban drums. It's not the first act that bans drums across Anglo-America. It happens in the Caribbean, but it's the first in North America, or in the 13 colonies. This code is one of multiple slave codes. It's not the first slave code in South Carolina, but it does represent a reckoning with Stono. There's a provision in the law that says anything that was done by white people in response to Stono is lawful. If you murdered somebody, it's fine. It's rendered lawful, like retroactively. In keeping with prior slave codes, and in keeping with this idea of spatialization, there's just extensive elaboration of all the ways that essentially non-plantation space will be policed. So what times and what places beyond the enclosure of the plantation, anybody who is coded as black, is subject to enforcement, is subject to scrutiny. Those who are able to exercise that scrutiny is extremely expansive. It's essentially the white population. It may also include indigenous people on the frontier at that time. In any case, the core of the code, it takes a long time to say this or to enumerate all the possible variations and details, is to elaborate like time, place, and manner of being versus not being, and all the punishments that accompany any violation of those terms. And so at that abstract level, clearly the penal state, the carceral state, and the way that particular activities are criminalized that then produce criminal justice consequences is echoing that dynamic.
And I'll say, I mean, that's so real. And when you see the performance, let's say one direct, almost direct, would be one of the law statutes said no more than 7 can gather. And so when you think about even like, it was just so ridiculous to say, but like historically you would hear in African Americans in corporate America would be concerned if they gathered in larger groups because it could be perceived as threatening. So we go back to the Stono Rebellion and they're limiting, so therefore if you see a group of 7 or more, that is to be banned, that is to be handled because it is illegal to gather in groups above. And it's an interesting selection of a number. I've never studied that. Why 7? Why not 6? 5, 4? I don't know. But that was a clear part of the and I think that affects us even today in terms of when we see people of color gathered in large numbers, what is the initial reaction, especially from the white community, are the government structures. So, and another one, and we do use the Negro Act a lot in the work, especially in the second half. And we use the director of the work uses a very creative device to share that. But it is helpful if you've read the Negro Act, or at least pieces of it. One of the ordinances said, especially, they should not be allowed together, but especially on Saturday night. And it's written, this is 1739, 1740. Saturday night clearly has always been a special night for people, but it is now a night where we must watch this gathering. So when you see the work, I think a lot of it, we do start in 1739, but we end up in 2023, and there's a lot of back and forth in this conversation because I think what we are saying is a lot of these things are still with us today. Even and that we should study these types of laws and see how they impact how we police and govern even to this day.
I want to add, at one time you could not break dance on the corners in Minneapolis, Minnesota. You would get arrested for breakdancing. At one time, you even could not stand in groups of 3 in downtown Minneapolis. I lived it, so. Yes.
And I was going to add that the groups of 2 to 3 is going to be a feature of the immediate post-Civil War era, because when those black codes that were passed in every single southern state were enacted, they were hell-bent on restricting the assembly of black folks. And certainly 7 to 8 was too large. They would get that down to 2 or 3 and pass all kind of vagrancy laws to disrupt black gathering, which is, in many ways, is almost always innocent, but it could be criminalized at a moment's notice when you do see people standing together, just doing something as basic as talking. Yeah.
Wow. Gosh.
I mean, that is kind of heavy.
It's really heavy.
Even I'm thinking about it now in terms of building the work. That rule in particular of gathering and taking away the ability to gather, basically, and being threatened by the gathering, because who knows if, especially in response to something like the Stono Rebellion, if you want to make sure that does not happen again, I'm sure the colonists were thinking. I mean, what's also interesting, and I'd love to talk about this, is they wrote, the Negro Act is written as a letter to the King of England. Can you talk more about that? I mean, I never really heard about his response, actually. Has that been documented? Did he write a letter back?
Yeah, like, dear colonists, like, good to, no, this is really a reflection of the nature of South Carolina as a royal colony, and that every law passed by a colonial assembly has to be approved, or in theory has to be approved by the Crown, Parliament or the Crown. It would go into force without such approval, but a veto from London would override the law. But just a side note is that the posture of the letter perhaps draws out the need to write a preamble, so that 1740 statute has an opening statement about the nature of the law to follow. That is a very different preamble than the 1712 slave code, like the equivalent Better Ordering Act. That prior code tried to justify slavery. It did so through like invocations of barbarism. The 1740 Act simply says that the state makes slavery, that slavery is established by positive law, and tailors, or like the goal then of the statute will be managing this legal creation. So unlike any prior slave code in South Carolina, there are regulations of treatment. So if a planter, slave owner, engages in the dangerous act of like punishing beyond his legal capacity, then in theory that enslaver has endangered the community of slaveholders by potentially provoking a backlash. And so that kind of managing of the institution, trying to make the institution safe as opposed to treating it as a kind of constant warfare, is part of the pivot that one sees in the 1740 Act.
Ooh, all right. I had something that came up when we were talking about music. I'm going back just a little bit, but it's odd to me that how popular music, for me, the popular dominant hip hop music is weaponized, and then a bunch of people are gathering, and it's very destructive. I think that that's so odd. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. Let's go to another question. Among South Carolina enslavers, what was the reaction to the Stono Rebellion? What did the colonial government do?
The Negro Act is
the
most obvious response, but yes.
The one other point that I would note in addition to this act is that there's a 3-year tax placed on the importation of any new African person. That tax was set at £100, which was prohibitive. So effectively, once it went into force, no Africans were imported into South Carolina for a 3-year period. So that should suggest the kind of considerations or calculations that went on amongst enslavers who were accustomed to an only increasing supply of people.
And that's so concerning to me. I did not know of that particular tax. I mean, because one thing that I've been very, resistant on diving into is the domestic slave trade. And the things that happened with the lack of importation, what was done in order to keep the workforce present and whatnot. That's a very difficult time in history, of course, as you can imagine. But what is also interesting to me is, if this is 1740 with the Negro Act's pass and trying to control, that only 30 years later, the country will be fighting against Imperial England. And so I like to say what this show is this an exploration of early American activism, if you will? Like, these are Angolans, African Americans, fighting for against freedom and injustice in 1740 and 1739, just 20 years before the Boston Tea Party and other acts of rebellion would start that would lead to the creation of the country. So it's really, protests and activism has been a part of the DNA of the country and continues. And I think what it reminds me of, it helps us in a way, although we may not realize at the time, clearly, it does move the country forward. This legislation, I think, takes us back in terms of freedom and equality, clearly, but future protests, I think, would move us forward.
In many ways, this is an untenable situation, because you're absolutely right. The colonies are in the middle of a 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War is a broader war. French and Indian is more continental, but it's going to be the prelude to the American Revolution, which is going to put pressure on the institution of slavery, colonial slavery, because the colonists have done the unthinkable. They have turned against their king. And so the question becomes for enslaved Africans is that which side do you choose? And it was a clear choice for them because they wanted to choose the side who was going to win and then liberate them after the end of the war. Now, they have no way of knowing who's going to win, which side is going to win. But certainly that's why you have enslaved Africans fighting on the side of the British and then many fighting on the side of the American colonists. And when the American colonies actually win the war, then the question becomes what happens to all those Africans who fought on the side of the British? Well, they had to flee. The British felt somewhat duty-bound to take many of them back to England, some to Canada, some to the Caribbean, but it wasn't really the greatest situation for them, although they were now physically free. So if you follow those communities later, they really are experiencing harsh conditions as free blacks, whether it's in Nova Scotia or those who went to Sierra Leone. But so the aftermath of Stono. So when you guys were talking, it reminded me that there's a potential rebellion that's about to take place in 1740, I believe, in Charleston. So about another 100 to 150 black folks gather, inspired by the Stono example. And they're not trying to get to St. Augustine, which is free Florida at that point, but they are going to march on the colonial seat of Charleston. But again, it was nixed because there was a few enslaved blacks who told white authorities that this was going to take place. So then, of course, the backlash is that many of them are killed and dispersed. But under this new provision of the 1740 Negro Act, many of them are really put down in a bad way. But yes, so the aftermath, I would say it's the next year, 1740, all the way up through 1776 and 1783, when the new nation is founded.
I need to hang out with y'all more. In the little bit of research that I did, there were mentionings that Stono wasn't successful. Like I've seen that in print. It wasn't a successful rebellion. I would like to ask, why was it successful? if we can go ahead and talk about that, like, was there some success from it? I mean, that might be kind of hard to, I don't know, but.
I guess it depends on how you define success.
True, true.
If success means that that black South Carolinians were liberated, then it was not. But if your definition of success is that it raised the consciousness of other black folks in the area that they could do something like this and pull it off. And as I mentioned, the rebellion, the conspiracy in 1740, but also in terms of exercise a certain kind of agency, scaring the hell out of white folks, whatever. If your definition of success are those kinds of things, mobilizing the community, then the Stono Rebellion was indeed a success. But it depends on your measure.
Yeah, and I think you have to look at it like seeds of resistance. I mean, do you get to Stono, eventually you get to this, to this, you know, reckoning, does that, you know, who knows what that rebellion did in terms of changing the tenor of the country? Did it create more allies? You know, who knows along the way to this country's history. It's hard to look at Stono. That's why I think it's nice to bring it into this larger conversation, like as a part of history, not a standalone. And there are many other rebellions and revolts that would take place that we just haven't really talked as much about.
Aaron, would you like to talk about some of those those other rebellions that, I mean, because I even read, like, this was one of the greatest rebellions, like, at the same time, like, not so much. So I seen that, I was like, I'm kind of confused here, like, but there were many rebellions, like, prior to this. You want to talk about some of those? And do we think that any of those had an influence? Could we even say that? Or no? In some kind of round? It depends on however we look at what influence might be, right?
And it's a pretty challenging question. So the model of a slave uprising or a slave revolt, when viewed just in the United States, produces a really narrow vision of resistance, and this has been, you know, just fully critiqued. So, you know, one doesn't teach slave resistance primarily through, you know, assessing a given uprising. Like, was it wise? Was it strategic? What was it like? What were the immediate effects of it? Simply because the particular configuration of American slavery, demographically, spatially, didn't just lend itself to the type of protracted, larger warfare that one finds in Jamaica and most of all in Haiti, right? So if you're applying the metric of Haiti to Nat Turner or to Gabriel or to Stono or to the German Coast Uprising in Louisiana in 1811, then you'll only register failure. Rather, you know, I think the insight to see is that there are different versions of hope, different like versions of aspiration that are irrepressible. They're responsive to changed circumstances. They use different languages, but that in and of itself means that slavery as a total institution, one that like suppresses, you know, the desire for freedom is unsuccessful.
Just to quickly add to that, I think also Haiti is the example that all black communities, enslaved communities, want to follow. They just do, and it's about ridding themselves of white oppression and living in total freedom. And that's going to be important for every single community pre-revolution and post. So even the conspiracies aren't just as important as the ones that were pulled off. Nat Turner was successful in the sense that he killed 60 whites, but Gabriel Prosser's and Demarc Vesey's were large-scale conspiracies that may not measure up the same way. But we teach them in African American history because they are important, and they are part of the larger history of resistance. But also, breaking tools are, and poisoning white people's food. Those are also acts of resistance that are just as important as a full-scale slave rebellion.
Thank you all. Please give our panelists a hand, please, beautiful people. We would like to open up the floor, as they say, right? Just don't fall in. But we wanna open up the floor and give some time for Q&A. And Carolina, thank you very much for everything. And the microphone is open.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks you all for being here too. This is awesome. I'm a tap dancer, and I've been growing up, like learning about some of these origins. But it's really cool to hear something so in depth on some of the things that I find to be the origin of where tap dancing comes from. And I also am curious about things like these. I'll just rattle these off, and you can do whatever you want with them. But did forms of step/percussion dance exist before this law? Also, did it affect the size of groups of OG step groups? Like, did they have to be 7 or less people in these groups? Were there other band instruments that also happened because of this law, or was it just drums? And also, what drums were used during the rebellion? Like, what are they using djembes like you were playing, or?
Very good question. And listen, and I know you're asking me, so I'm just gonna throw this out there. I would say, because we were talking a little bit about this, it kind of not possible, but
More than likely not. A djembe.
yeah, more than likely not a djembe, but more something along the lines of like even like say the Congolese drum is very different than this, and it's shaped very differently. It might have been. I know in my little bit of research, again, I found that the oldest drum that I came across that's kept still in a museum today was found in 1730, but it was from Ghana. It was from Ghana. It was a traditional Ghanaian drum, and so it was around in the early 1700s or mid 1700s. So anyway.
Well, artistically, if we talk about, it's wonderful to see a tap dancer in the space. I'm not. I'm a stepper. I'm a traditional stepper. And what South Africa's been saying for years is that stepping is the latest in a long line of percussive dance forms created, body percussive dance forms in African American communities. So at the performance, the first one that you'll see is the ring shout. If you've never seen the ring shout, it's a fantastic tradition that basically turns a wooden platform, like a praise house, which is what you'll see in the space, into a drum, and then the shuffling of the feet on this raised platform create a percussive sound. So many scholars say, in terms of the dance, say that it is one of the oldest traditional practice or dance forms of African American people, and it is a sacred tradition. It's not dance for entertainment. It is ritual as part of communion or something like that. So you'll get the chance to see that on stage tomorrow. And then what is fascinating about stepping is that it is very much full body percussion versus your form is primarily here. So so stepping to me is like a merger of tap with patting, juba, and ham bone. Ham bone predates tap, potentially. Exactly. You do that too. I love it. Well, you'll see some of that in the show because that is definitely on the way to stepping. We go there too, and then we go to tap, and then stepping is like bringing that together with the feet, and you have a full body percussive instrument. So it is so much more study has to be done on the evolution of the movement. Then, of course, you can't look at. If you just look at stepping's development as a form, you can't erase the military's influence on stepping. There's a very clear direction or correlation between African Americans going into the military, World War II, even later, Korean War, bringing all those traditions onto the college campus, joining fraternities, sororities, and that influences how. So therefore, the strict lines you see in stepping, the formation, the very precise movement informs, that is informed by African American participation in the military and bringing it onto the campus. So it's just so much how we get to this form called stepping, and that's what this work is about. I wish we could dive even more into all that. It's so much history that leads to why African Americans chose stepping in the first place, or even developed stepping as a form. It's clearly informed by their time here from, really from upon arrival. So there's a lot there. I know you had something, you asked about what kind of drums. Well, so what I'll share with you is, so when you walk into the space for the performance, I hope you bring many people to see the show, you're going to see a structure in the middle of the stage. That is our interpretation of a praise house. A praise house was a safe space for Africans during the time of slavery. There's a wooden, very simple structure, not much bigger than the space that we're on. So we basically have built a praise house, and that's where the story begins. And it is a wooden raised structure, so you can imagine when I do this, it just resonates, and it feels very good. So as a stepper, whenever I walk into a space, the first thing I want to do is see how the floor feels, because this basically becomes my drum. So I think that's where we first start to see the drum being transferred to the space, right? Since it's no longer, they're playing it the same way. And then the other instrument, if you will, or device that they use is a stamping stick. And there's a scholar that I love to introduce to you all. If you don't know him already, his name is Dr. David Pleasant. He's the one who actually introduced us. He's from South Carolina, Georgia, Sea Islands area. He introduced us to the concept of the Drumfolk, and actually brought him in to teach us over 20 years ago these histories and traditions, and then we've just been playing with them ever since. I mean, he'd love to meet you guys.
I'd love to meet him too. Anyone else? How was that? Was that good?
Oh, yeah, I'm just still, were there any other band instruments besides drums?
So the statute would list a horn. So this is effectively parroting language that has already been used in Jamaica. The goal here is to just limit distant communication.
Things that travel over long
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Second line is a much later tradition, I
Yeah,
would
that's-
imagine.
yeah.
But I don't know the origins of second line, but definitely no second lines and no jazz trouble. But yeah, that is interesting, the horn. So you're saying that is a borrowed, because I don't know of the horn's use, so that was going to kind of just.
Yeah.
And when they say horn, do you think it is just a simple?
I think it actually might have been a cattle horn, like a large twisted sort of like steer, bone horn.
Oh, like a
but-
bellow. Oh, yeah, like
Yeah.
an old school. Okay,
Like,
gotcha.
like
Not a
when you
French
see like
horn,
a crotch. No, like
But a true, a true like
Crude, a
shell.
very
yeah,
crude horn.
no, like like do you know what a shofar is?
Shofar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
Okay. Yeah.
Nice.
A traditional instrument. Then.
Hey.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Anyone else? Yo. Okay. Then okay. And then we'll get you. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Is this on? Okay. Yes. So you guys had mentioned a little bit about hip hop and the influence of the drum and percussions in hip hop, and it's such an influential part of, I feel like, the culture, the history. What do you think about? Because you did bring up the act from the 1700s to contemporary 2023, and I was just thinking about modern day hip hop and music and how it's spread so quickly through social media. So going back as the drum as the focus, how do you feel, what are your own personal analysis regarding hip hop and the capitalist consumeration of hip hop and how it has been stolen from people? Drums were something that our ancestors could not use, but now they are used, and Travis Scott's concerts are filled with people that don't look like him. So what do you think about the consumeration of the history that was stolen from us in the form of music today?
Thank you for that question.
Well, What I'll say
Professor?
mostly is I didn't mention, I've mentioned loosely the beatbox, which is vocal percussion, at its best. And that finds its way into this show as we're exploring all these different percussive elements and so hip hop clearly also finds its way into this performance as well as an undeniable force, a political force, music force, all those things. And I think the show, for me, one of the themes I know the director, Jakari Sherman, talks about a lot is about reclamation. And I think it is about, yes, these forms can become commodified and taken, but there's constant innovation. And then part of it not becoming fully commodified, to be honest, when I started Step Africa, that was one of my concerns, that stepping could be taken if we didn't quickly work to create a viable company that could preserve and whatnot. So all that to say, I think by reclaiming forms and perpetually nurturing forms, we can kind of counter some of that commodification. Because really it's not personal, I don't think. It's just popular. And so hip hop becomes something that the world, breakdancing is about to be an Olympic sport. It started on the streets of New York. It was illegal in Minneapolis years ago, and now it's going to be, you can get a gold medal for that. So, ballet was once a cultural form, only for certain people, and now there's a ballet in every city around the world. So I think we have to look at that, as the world becomes closer, we share forms and jazz, clearly. But it is, for stepping in particular, our mission has been to just make sure that as it is shared with the world, that we at least know the history and the culture behind it. And so others can do it and take part and but let's just make sure we do what we can to keep that history and culture alive by not just, leaving it.
I am concerned about some of the appropriation. I'm glad you brought it up, in that we are always innovative in terms of creating new genres. But what concerns me is that the old genres, the audiences can be virtually all white. So you see this in blues. If you go to a blues show or a jazz show, there's all white. I went to see Wynton Marsalis at the Minneapolis Orchestra. And I'm looking around like, where the hell is all the black folk? There's no one there, right? I think there is a certain kind of commodification that occurs that's about making money. But what we do as artists is that we don't completely leave that genre, but we create new ones. Yes. And that's where the innovation comes in. But I am struck by the fact that there are certain cultural forms that are less commodified, yeah, like stepping. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you guys can speak to that. Why are some more commodified than others?
I want to throw my little 2 cents, yeah, as living hip hop. I would like to throw my 2 cents on in the conversation. I believe essentially what I'm not most concerned with is what gives me the ability to do what I just did ever being taken out of me. It'll never go away, right? So no matter what the industry does, right? No matter the way our pop culture does things, right? And I say, like, if we didn't personalize it so much, because like a lot of that stuff that we create, we don't even honor. So then we get mad when it's being taken, and it's like, okay, but did we secure keeping it enough? Did we, and what does that even mean? And I think a lot of what plays against what is essentially intrinsic in you gets lost in like the human parts of stuff that it's very finite. It's like, for real, we're tripping over that, but breakdancing did not just happen in the Bronx. It happened a long time ago in the early 1900s. People was hitting swipes on the floor way before it became, popularized out of the Bronx. You feel me? So this thing is unstoppable. And what happens here in the world of things is I think we need to, one, not look for it being important outside of what is essentially the source of what it is. That's why I feel it. Because it's, yeah, I own this. You know what I'm saying? And my Egun, my ancestors own this. Not some company. They'll never be able to own it, you know, because it doesn't come out of them. Yeah. Yeah. So, but
The other question in there, but this is really beautiful, because I think, yes, at the level of our spirits, we own it.
Yeah.
And it can never be taken away.
Yeah.
But once we present it to the world,
Yeah.
then it could be somebody else's, and just it's still ours, but it could be less ours.
Right.
And I think that when you talk about hip hop being something that was organic to a community, is no longer that way. But I'm glad to see that we've produced a few billionaires who are able to do some other things other than music. But I'm wondering, is that our insatiable desire to keep evolving and keep spinning it because it keeps getting appropriated. And yes, because it's always here, and so we can just go off and create new forms, which is a beautiful thing. I'm always thinking, okay, when are white folks going, capture soul music and R&B? And when will we let that go? Well, I mean, we may never let it go. There's certain things that'll still be here. But the appropriation is a scary thing to watch and witness, because we don't control the art form once it leaves the spirit.
True that.
Okay, I didn't know. Okay, is this on? Yeah. This is on. Okay, I just have a reflection. Okay, just to share. So I'm an initiate into a couple of African traditional religions. I've been taught by my elders that the drum is the most potent form of prayer, that it reaches the heavens faster than anything. I like the point made about it not being spatialized. That's what reminded me of that. I think of that when I think of it in protests. I think of what people must have been praying for when they were playing those drums. And maybe not even in the form of prayer that we would call, going into your closet and speaking to your God, but actually like my full intention in my heart's passions and desires coming through the drum. That I also have been taught that it's the best form for putting us into trance. And I think of how the drum is used to bring us into unison and how to remind us where the heart of something is. And that, for me, is why it's still in all protest, why it's so important to protest. It also reminds me of the consumeration of such things, in that some of us have to be praying that white people will get on board. You know what I'm saying? Maybe that's why Travis Scott's concerts are full of white people. Ooh. Because actually we need whites to get on board with what we're doing. I think this is probably the most thought-provoking conversation I've heard in forever. It's beautiful. I think of how ancient practice never ceases. Like what you said, it's inside of us, and it's going to come with many faces. And at some point, we're going to have to all remember that it's more than the money that it can be sold for. Like it's more than even I think of how so many different blacks and different mixings were present, and that how that's present today, and how we say black people are not a monolith. I hear that all the time, and it's like never been true. And yet we continue to say we all need to do something. So I like how actually I keep hearing that the drum is bringing us together. Actually.
Yeah, I wanna touch on something that I probably don't. By the way, that's my partner, right there. I'm around that incredible brain. One thing I struggle with the most is still the way this is treated as if something evil is going to happen because it's being played. I'm leaving a church one day, y'all, invited to a church up on 41st in Bloomington real quick, and we would gather and use the drum to basically help people decompress, de-escalate, literally take them out of their monkey brain, chill pill for real. And I was leaving out, and a woman asked me, who was coming in with their congregation and their people, and I'm not, I'm going to stay away from the titles because, see, I feel like Americans, we're psycho because we're too caught up in race and we're too caught up in class, and it gets in the way of everything. But anyway, so the woman said to me, were you doing voodoo? And everybody that was hanging out with me that she couldn't see wanted to say something really quickly, because that's how I roll, y'all. They all wanted me to say something, but what I didn't do was respond to the blatant, straight-up demonizing of my ancestors' culture. That's basically, and she didn't even know that, but this person has learned that by way of American culture. She wasn't an American, but, but anyway, I just want to put that out there. So, like, when you say that, to me, that's one thing it's a difficult contention sometimes. Like, we know this, and then a lot of us don't, who are descendants from the people who created this culture, don't like it. We know this. We find that difficulty. So that becomes kind of painful, and how do we see it then continuing to grow with that being a reality that some of us has taken on. So,
Well, I was watching you play, and I was watching the water in my glass, move. I don't know if you guys noticed that. And I was thinking about all the vibrations coming off of the drum, and I was actually thinking of the drum as a healing. So it's interesting that you have used drumming in that capacity. And I do think as we start to reclaim parts of the culture that were outlawed, taken away, it'll be interesting to see what we discover if we really get behind these instruments and find out what else it can do for a community. I mean, we're getting ready to head to Africa, Southern Africa, for a tour. And I'm looking forward to a friend of mine who's an artist, is now a traditional healer. And I'm looking forward to speaking to him. He was talking about how he's working to resurrect. He's in South Africa, so he's trying to resurrect his connections to traditional African culture, because it has been hard to hold on. I mean, I see that I went to a native ceremony the other day, indigenous ceremony, and how they're trying to resurrect those traditions and bring them back. And it's a lot of work.
yeah.
It's a lot of, going for it because the line has been cut. But I'm excited about the possibilities. And I think this work, Drumfolk, is about reclaiming that drum, seeing how it is present and how those histories from so far away are still with us, and how we can all take in those stories and move forward. So I'm excited for you all to see the work now, especially after this talk. In fact, I could do this all day.
Me too. I could do this
because
all
I'm
day.
so intrigued by
Do you have a question?
the scholarly conversation.
All right, and there's also one that came in. There's one that came in, and I wanna get to it. We got about like 9 minutes there, so we're gonna get right to you, Sister. This question is: what was the process of the rebels in 1939 to 40 from communicating with drums to drumming, or communicating via stepping? Did stepping start before 1739?
Okay, so she's saying, what is the process of the rebels in 1739 and 40 from communicating with drums? How do they use the drum? So the story that we have learned, I'd love for you to back, is they use the drum to call people together, A. And what was also very interesting that didn't make it into the show, and the director would speak on this more, is that apparently, and I'd love to hear, it wasn't just a straight rebellion, it wasn't just a straight war all the way through. There would be breaks. And they would use the drum to keep motivation and have a good time in the midst of battle. That was really interesting to me. And so when we were developing the work, we tried to incorporate some of that. I don't think it really worked as well, but this idea that the drum was a rallying for the people, but it was also keeping them motivated during the in-between battles. It wasn't just a straight battle, right? It kind of went from home and they would stop. I don't know if you have any thoughts on how the drum was actually used in terms of recording.
Oh, well, there is one major break, except the break is integral to the warfare in the way that you describe. In the Congolese tradition, the drums of war was just a critical part of strategy. It was both unifying, it allowed some people to rest and others to keep their bodies sort of like fluid and mobile. It wasn't, as the sort of like colonial observer said, a confusing act of like partying or drunkenness. It was like completely integral to like the operation.
Right. So raise the vibes up and keep on fighting. Right. Okay. All right. Right. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. So I have two questions, and you can seize one or the other or both, because they kind of bring some things together. So I'm interested in drum as resistance, and the drum band, did it extend to Native American?
Eva?
Yeah.
Hi, Eva
Hi,
Barr.
you.
Hi. I know that voice.
When's he gonna register, baby?
Hey.
Anyway, we'll talk after.
Okay.
Anyway, so did the drum band extend to Native American populations at the time? Because surely we had a lot of indigenous resistance movements that relied on drums, and I'm just curious if at that time anyone knows anything about that. And second, significance of Catholicism, which is huge, but in terms of white supremacy securing its, extending itself in the ways that we know it has and has over time. These particular folks involved in the Stono Rebellion, being Catholic, makes my mind do a lot of different things. And I'm just curious if somebody can speak to those questions.
So as to your first question, it can often be hard to really picture how weak projecting like white colonial power was in this period of time. So the drum ban applied to those who were enslaved, and there were in South Carolina still native slaves. As a proportion of the population, they were diminishing, and in just a real sign of the way racial thinking works, at some point around this time, native slaves stopped being counted as indigenous, and they were just counted as black, as non-white. And so to the extent that one falls within the jurisdiction and the spaces where like colonial power can project and enforce a ban, then sure. But essentially, almost all of like continental North America is native ground, and there's no drum ban there.
Were these hand drums or were these drums with sticks?
Can you repeat the question in the microphone?
Were these drums hand drums or drums with sticks? If we were to go based on Angolan, there would be drums with sticks, right? That's how, when we were in Angola, that was the tradition that carried. So there would be a tall, thin, tubular drum and the stick.
Yeah. Right. Depending on regions, you know, because it's depending on certain regions, like there's the combination. Like a company would, you probably know that though, but like a company with djembe would be the dundun, and all of them are played with sticks and bell. But they actually precede the djembe though, also.
Yeah.
They were before the djembe.
To your question about Catholicism, I think that's something that was really striking to us, learning about there already being Catholics prior to being, you know, 'cause that's so counter to what we hear about who Africans were before they came here. We don't hear that they were Catholics, you know, that they were in battle and knew guns and warfare. But in going to Angola, we would visit one of their museums that's dedicated to this institution of slavery, and from their perspective, and that was a really big point. So for me, what it's artistically, what it tells me is that when they started the rebellion, they already knew what freedom, they clearly they knew what freedom was. But they knew that this was an injustice to them, which I think is fascinating, like who these Africans are who started this rebellion. They know that this is an injustice. And I'm also curious about, you know, this, you mentioned St. Augustine and getting to Spanish Florida, like there's no newspaper, so there's that body that's in the people as well, that there is freedom somewhere. There's an opportunity to get out of this, and that's what we're trying to do with this rebellion. You know, so that just puts it in such a different light when you see the work. You see that they approached the rebellion they've brought their history, their culture to this rebellion, and they're thinking about what it look like to be outside of the current situation that they're in 1739. You know,
I really believe that the combination of African fighters who were warriors in the Congo, in Kingdom of Congo, being brought over, then you have Spain, because of St. Augustine, that being something that is on the minds of many Portuguese-speaking Africans, although the language is different. Still, there is some, the Iberian culture is similar. But you also have the Spanish authorities menacing with the English and encouraging Africans to run away. And Georgia is a free colony. It starts off as a colony that has outlawed slavery. So if I can make it, if I'm an African, if I can make it across the Savannah River, you know, I may be home free. I'm good as gold to get to Florida. And so that's part of the culture of Low Country, South Carolina, because they know that is free territory. If I can actually make it across the Savannah River.
Just to let everyone know, we've made it to the 5-minute mark. This has been very beautiful. I hope you all have had a very wonderful time and that your minds and stomachs are filled at the same time. There's one more question real quick that has come in, and it's basically, who should we follow to appreciate this category of the arts? I don't understand the question myself. Who should we follow to appreciate this category of the arts?
Follow us on social media? Oh, okay.
Maybe that's
yes.
it.
Well, I think you should definitely follow these two professors in terms of getting to know the history and behind this particular work, Drumfolk. But Step Africa, we're on all the social media channels, and we do talk about Drumfolk a lot in the process, and our other productions that we have that introduce the art form of stepping to communities all over the world. So. Yes, if that's the question, I hope that's...
You guys could also follow Truth Mason.
And yes, of course. What
Instagram.
Am I saying, man? And you got to follow Truth.
Just hit me up on my IG. No.
What is the IG?
My IG is Truth Maze.
My phone's over there. I'm
Yep.
follow that.
Just Truth Maze. Just you can find me there. Truth Maze on Instagram. And yeah, we're now at time. We would like to once again thank you all. Please show our panelists some love, love, love. And hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow at the performance. If not, I will be there Friday. Yeah, and a group of our students are coming tomorrow from North High. Yes, from the high school. We'll be here, and we can't wait. And yeah, it's gonna be beautiful. All right. So once again, show them some love. Show yourself some love. Thank you. Oh, and we couldn't have done this without the powerful Treacherous 3 right here. So please show Kristen, Carolina, and Lucy some love too, because we couldn't have done this, and Dan and the sound and all of that good stuff. All right.